Lie about giving me a raise? Say goodbye to your income. I've been working as a subcontractor for a guy named Contractor for almost a year now. He hires guys like me to fix up houses that a realty company buys. He's a real character, always yelling and complaining about prices and how long it takes to do things. He doesn't make a secret of the fact that he wants to get the most work done for the least amount of money. He's been doing this for years, and he doesn't shy away from telling everyone that he's the boss. When you're working for him, you learn to keep your mouth shut and do what you're told. I used to be a plumber, and I'm still pretty good at it, but working with Contractor isn't easy. He's always looking for someone to blame if something goes wrong. When it comes to money, Contractor's tough. I remember it was tax season and he gave everyone else their W-2s. I was working on a project for him in the city, and he called me over to the house in the suburbs he was renting. He said he needed a few extra hands on a quick project, so I stopped what I was doing and rushed over there. He's one of those guys who is all, buddy, and my house is your house. He ended up giving me a 1099 and called it a tax form. I was a little confused since it wasn't a typical W-2. I even told him that I was missing some money. I was frustrated because he was always so quick to shout at people about things, but when I asked about the missing money, he seemed more concerned about whether or not I was making a big deal out of it. He kept saying he lost my tax form and to relax and stop stressing. He had just gotten a $25,000 Rolex and was talking about going to the Hamptons, but he was mad that I wanted the right amount of money. That's when I decided I didn't want to be a subcontractor anymore. At the end of the day, I realized Contractor was pretty well off. He was making a ton of money. I figured I was being pretty undervalued. He would boast about making over $2 million a year, but the $16 an hour I was making for a 10-hour workday just seemed wrong. I worked hard, but it felt like I was making him rich. It was frustrating. I thought, if he's making so much money, why am I making so little? Why couldn't I be on his level? One day, I felt brave enough to ask for a raise. I was ready to move up. He just laughed in my face. He said something like, "What do you think this is, a charity? I'm not here to make you rich." He told me to work harder, and that was the end of the conversation. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I didn't want to just accept being treated unfairly. So, I worked extra hard, doing even more than what he asked. I was the first one in every morning and the last one out. I wanted him to see my work ethic. I was determined to prove myself. A few months later, I tried again. Instead of asking for a raise, I tried a different approach. I said, how could I make myself even more useful to the company? We both would make more money if I was more productive. I'm sure there is something I can do. I figured he'd think I was just trying to help and he might finally see how much I wanted to work for him. Instead, he was kind of rude and told me to just focus on the work. Then, he added, get a van and a trailer. Then maybe we can talk about more money. He didn't even look me in the eye. I was confused. Why a van and a trailer? Why did that make any difference? It seemed like another way to make me do more work without making more money. I was starting to see the writing on the wall, so I started working a few side jobs to try to earn some extra money. I needed to save up so that maybe one day I could afford that van and trailer. I knew that it wouldn't get me the raise I was looking for, but it was better than nothing. I worked long hours and saved as much as I could, sometimes. Not even eating for days. Contractors started noticing. He would say stuff like, you really know your stuff, you're doing good work, or, I need to get you a reward for doing such good work. He looked at me differently, like he was starting to see me as someone important, like he needed me. I could practically hear the dollar signs clinking in his head. Then one day, I did it. I bought a van, my dad's old Ford, a real gas guzzler. And I found a cheap, rusty little trailer, not even a nice one, just a 5x10 trailer that needed some repairs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The next morning, I came to work with the van and trailer trailing behind. I smiled big at Contractor and said, you know, I was finally able to get that van and trailer. Now we can really make some money. I expected him to be impressed. Maybe even a little proud of me. I had done what he asked, and now I was ready to take on more responsibility. He just looked at me, gave me a blank stare, and mumbled, cool, before getting into his truck and driving away. I felt deflated. What was that all about? I felt stupid and disappointed. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I thought maybe he was just preoccupied, so I waited until the end of the day, hoping he'd calm down and we could talk about it. I decided to remind him. I went to his office and said, you know, I got the van and trailer just like we talked about. I'm ready to be more helpful and do even more. He gave me that sharp, cynical look and said, what are you talking about? I never said anything about any van and trailer. Yes, you did, I said. You said if I got a van and trailer that I could get paid more. That's why I bought them. What's going on? I was really starting to lose it. He looked at me, his jaw clenched, and said, I never said any of that shush tea. If you want anything, then you have to work for it. It was like a bucket of ice water being poured on my head. I just stared at him for a second, trying to process what he had said. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. I felt so humiliated, so defeated. I was ready to explode. But I was so used to his behavior that I simply mumbled, yes, sir, and walked out. It was time to move on. Adam, the electrician, he's a really nice guy. He's one of the few people who I felt like I could actually talk to, the kind of guy who is willing to listen. I'd been complaining to him about my boss, telling him that I was looking for a better job. Don't even bother looking, he said. You don't get ahead working for him, kiddo. This is about learning and becoming your own boss. He just keeps telling me I need to work for it, I said. Adam smiled, shook his head, and said, you're not supposed to be working for him to get to the top. That's not how things work with him. You're supposed to learn as much as you can. Work with him until you know everything about the business. Then, you do your own thing. He's not your mentor, he's your first boss. He taught you the ropes, now it's your turn. What do you mean? I said. What's the point if I'm just going to learn to become the boss of a shush TTY company? He laughed and patted me on the back. It's not about him. It's about you. What you learn from him, you can take it and make it better. What do you mean? I asked. He said, you're a good worker, and you know what you're doing. You're a natural. Why don't you try to get your contractor's license? Then, you can call the shots. You don't have to wait around for someone to give you a raise, you can do it yourself. I hadn't thought about that. I always thought about it as getting ahead in this specific company, but maybe he was right. It wasn't about this company, it was about me. I thought, if contractor could make all this money, why couldn't I? I knew what I had to do. I spent weeks learning everything I could about how to become a general contractor in my state. I found books to read, but they were expensive. I knew I couldn't afford them while I was still working for contractor and paying my bills and raising a family. I needed some extra income. Then I found a group in my neighborhood who needed a handyman, doing a little bit of everything. It was perfect. It was like learning how to run my own company but under the radar. I took what I had learned from plumbing and from working with contractor, and I learned some new stuff, like installing cabinets and fixing fences. I made good money, and the work was getting me the kind of experience that would help me start my own business. I made good money, and it was pretty satisfying. One day, I was at the gas station filling my van with gas. I couldn't believe how much gas cost. That's when I had my big idea. If I was going to get my contractor's license, and if I wanted to have my own business, I didn't have to wait for contractor. He was being such a shush tea. Why work for him when I could do it on my own? I was good enough. Maybe I could even make more money than he was. I had references from all the customers I was doing side jobs for, and I had learned the business. I researched how to start my own company. It wasn't easy. You need a lot of stuff, a business license, an LLC, insurance. It was more complicated than I thought, and there were so many rules and regulations. It took a while to get everything squared away, but I was determined to make it happen. I felt like I had been working towards this my whole life. When I was younger, I worked construction with my father and had done a bunch of different things with him around the house. I felt like I had a foundation. After months of saving money and jumping through hoops, I finally got to take the contractor's license exam. I was ready, but it was a 3-hour drive to get to the exam center and I had to pay $300. It was Tuesday and I was still working for contractor. That meant missing work and spending more money. I had never been to the testing center before, so I was worried that I would miss it, that something would go wrong. I could feel my stomach knotting up with anxiety as I drove. The testing center was just a little storefront, cramped and kind of rundown. There were 3 other people there taking tests. The person who was overseeing the exam was a grumpy old woman, and she told everyone not to use their cell phones. I knew I was ready for the exam, so I was relaxed, even though it was a big deal. I was taking notes, reading through the questions, and checking my answers. I felt confident. But then, time ran out. I still had a few questions left. I was bummed, but I tried to focus on the questions I had answered. When the grumpy old woman finally took the test and I turned it in, she said, "You failed." I felt defeated, frustrated, angry. I had done all this work to get ready for the exam, and now I wasn't even going to get a second chance. I wanted to shout, "No, that's not true." I tried to find someone who would tell me that it was a mistake, that I had really passed. I almost thought that maybe this whole thing had been a big waste of time. I didn't want to give up, but I was ready to accept that I might not be a general contractor after all. I left the testing center, drove back home, and went straight to bed. I felt so defeated, but the next morning I woke up feeling a little better. A week later, I found out I had a baby boy. He was beautiful and healthy and was everything I had ever dreamed of. When I was finally able to put him to sleep, I thought, maybe it's not about me. Maybe it's about him. I thought about my childhood. I'd grown up in trailer parks, often. Going hungry and always getting made fun of at school for the clothes I wore. Even though I felt ashamed sometimes, I at least had a roof over my head. I always wanted video games that my friends had, but my parents couldn't afford them. I always wished I could go to a water park, but it just wasn't a possibility. I only went to a water park once, when I was a teenager, and my friend's parents brought me. Looking at my baby boy, I wanted so much for him. He deserved more than I had. He deserved the things that were important to me. I needed to get my license. I couldn't let this be it. I wouldn't let him have the kind of childhood that I did. I was ready to do whatever it took. I worked even more, saving every penny I could, and I retook the exam. I was determined to get my contractor's license, and I was prepared to go through hell and high water to do it. I took practice tests online and read everything I could about contractor's licenses and construction laws, even going through my old textbooks from plumbing school. I wanted to be ready for anything they threw at me. When the day came, I was still nervous, but this time, I passed. I felt like I could breathe again. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. With my new license in hand, I started thinking about what to do next. I was finally going to become the boss. It had been a long, frustrating road, but I'd made it. I had learned a lot, and now I had the skills and the experience to do what I wanted to do. Over the past few months, I had become friends with the owner of the realty company. We would talk at barbecues and play golf. I knew he had a good heart and he liked me. It made sense to befriend the guy who was paying my boss. He seemed like he'd be a lot more reasonable and understanding than my boss. I would try to casually talk about things with him. I mentioned how expensive it was for the houses to be built and fixed, and how much money contractor was making. Sometimes, he would nod along, seeming interested. It was hard to know if he was just being polite or if he was actually listening. But, he always asked me to stick around after the BBQs, and I'd share a few beers with him and just chat. I couldn't help but feel a bit smug. I knew that what I was doing was right. Contractor had been treating me poorly. If he was making so much money, he shouldn't have a problem paying me more. It didn't feel like a betrayal to me. I had worked hard, saved up money, and gotten my contractor's license, and I deserved a chance to do better for myself. Contractor had done nothing for me except make my life miserable. If he had treated me right, I would have kept working for him, but I was tired of feeling taken advantage of. Then one day, the owner called me up. "Hey, he said. I want you to come over to my house. I want to talk business." I wasn't sure what he meant. I thought, I'm just a subcontractor. What could he want to talk to me about? It didn't really matter to me because I was already happy. I knew my plan was coming together, and my new license had changed everything. I had my own company, my own future, and I could see how much my baby boy would benefit. I drove over to his house, expecting to chat about some trivial stuff like golf or fishing, or maybe just hang out and share some beers. But this was different. He said he wanted to meet out back, and when I walked around the house to his backyard, I knew something was up. I could see it in his eyes. He sat me down and started telling me how he and contractor had a disagreement. It turned out they hadn't seen eye to eye about a couple of deals they had going, and he was going to limit how much contractor could work with them. It sounded like they were about to have a huge fight. Then he looked at me and said, "I want you to come to a meeting on Friday morning. It's really important." I felt my stomach sink. What was going on? Why would the owner of the company want to see me at a meeting? Was I going to be in trouble? I thought, what have I gotten myself into? I knew there was no way to avoid the meeting, so I agreed to go. I thought I was just going to a normal meeting about work, like contractor would always take us to for a team meeting. "I'll be there," I said. We talked about his wife and fishing and whatever else he had on his mind, until it was time for me to leave. It was hard to fall asleep that night. I kept thinking about the meeting. I was worried. What was he going to say? What would happen? I wasn't sure if I was going to lose my side jobs because I was in this meeting with the owner of the realty company. I was ready to face any outcome. That Friday, I got out of bed early and drove over to the owner's office. This meeting was different. It was the kind of meeting where there were only the biggest bosses. "You're in for a treat today, Op," the owner had told me, which was kind of odd. I went into his office and people started introducing themselves to me. There was a bunch of people I hadn't met before. I found out that they were investors. I felt like I was on the set of a movie. These people were worth so much money. They could easily have bought my entire town. The meeting started and everyone shook my hand, which was strange, but I was able to act normally. About an hour later, Contractor walked into the room. He was wearing his typical stained t-shirt and cargo shorts. I was wearing a nice dress shirt and tie. I was ready to be a professional. The owner started introducing Contractor and said, "This is our longtime contractor," as if he'd known Contractor forever. I thought, "You're a terrible person and a terrible business person, but they make you sound like you're some kind of hero." Then the owner started talking about all the plans they had for the year and how they were expanding. He seemed really excited about the new investors. He told them, "We are on the brink of greatness." It was 2 hours of the typical company speak, about budgets and projections and numbers. It was like he was trying to impress them with how much money they had. They were probably there to invest more. Then, finally, the owner looked at me and said, "Op, I want to congratulate you for getting your contractor's license. It's great that you are starting your own business. That takes guts." I thanked him and tried to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. Then, the owner continued, "I want to say something special about Op. You know, I've been seeing him work here and I know he's really dedicated to the company and to his own business. I'm sure you all have seen him doing a great job on so many projects. He is the kind of person that we need in our company. I'd like to ask him a question in front of everyone." He was looking at me, and the owner looked nervous. He seemed excited, and his hand was sweating. He couldn't look at my boss, Contractor. It was really weird. Then he turned to me and said, "Op, I've been impressed with your work ethic and everything you've accomplished. I want to offer you a job as our property manager. It's an important position. It would require you to manage the building and upkeep of all of our properties." He continued, "You'd still have your own business and could work on side jobs, but you would be a contractor for the realty company. It would mean working on all the properties. We'd pay you a set rate, but it would be for the whole job. No more subcontracting." Contractor looked at me, but I wasn't sure what was going on. He had that look, like a deer in headlights. I thought, what is he's so nervous about? I didn't do anything wrong. I turned to the owner and asked, "What do you mean by that?" Just then, Contractor stood up. He was red in the face, sweating, and he started shouting, "What the shish tea? This is my company, my team. I've been working here for 10 years, this is all I do. You can't just replace me." Contractor looked like he was going to cry. He was looking at the owner like he'd been betrayed. I guess he thought the owner was going to do what I had done, steal his clients. But it wasn't that. The owner just chuckled and said, "We're not replacing you, but everything goes through Op from now on. He's going to be the one in charge. You can keep working here, but if you do, all your work goes through Op. You will only be doing what Op says, and you'll have to respect the people here. You'll have to be nice." It was like the owner had figured out that my boss had been taking advantage of him for all these years, and the owner wanted me to get my share. Contractor was really angry. He turned to me and screamed, "You're fired. You have no business here. Get out." The owner was so calm and collected that I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. He said, "Well, I think Op would do a great job managing things. What do you think, Op?" I turned to the owner and said, "I think you can afford me, right?" I had practiced this for weeks. I had a plan, but I needed to be calm and professional. It was a real poker face moment. I knew it was important to show that I was ready for this, to show that I had the confidence to handle this opportunity. He just nodded and shook my hand. "Yes, of course," he said. "You've earned this, Op. This is what you've been working toward. We're glad to have you on our team." Contractor just stood there looking defeated and he didn't say another word. He just stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. We continued the meeting, and I felt happy and nervous at the same time. The owner kept calling me Op, as if he had just met me, but there was an excitement in his voice. I think it was the type of excitement someone gets when they know something good has happened. "You can handle all of this, right? This year, we've got 60 houses for you to work on." "That's a lot," the owner said. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of it. My new position and all these new responsibilities and houses, but it was exciting. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. It was the reason I had saved my money, got my license, and played a little game with the owner. "Yes, sir," I said, and I could barely hold back tears. I felt grateful for this opportunity, for the family that had always believed in me, and for this moment. I couldn't help but feel proud of how far I had come. It was a feeling I didn't know I could have, the feeling of being on the top. I finally made it. I couldn't believe that I was the one who was finally in control.